You're listening to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio.
Donald Trump, not a big fan of the IRA, Kaylee. Not to be confused with the IRS. We know that as well. The Inflation Reduction Act.
Yes.
Not something we talk about a lot anymore, but one of the real pillars of the Biden administration's legislative accomplishments. Can you imagine what a Trump administration would mean for all these clean energy subsidies?
Well, that's a question that Bloomberg Intelligence is grappling with. And interesting to have this conversation on a day where we found out via economic data that inflation pressures are very much still there. And what you hear from the administration is that efforts like the Inflation Reduction Act are starting to eat away at inflationary pressures. A lot of it hasn't yet kicked in. And I wonder if it's those parts that have not yet kicked in, the money and the credits that have yet to be doled out that are in question.
It would take years to unfold.
Yeah.
That's why Nathan Dean and his colleagues at Bloomberg Intelligence, his team, put their expertise on this to get a sense of what it would look like. And he's with us now, among the most popular voices here on Balance of Power. Nathan, good to see you. Are we talking full repeal? I remember repeal and replace was the refrain after Obamacare, or less systemic than that?
Less systemic than that. I don't think you're going to see full repeal, partly because, look, you may see it on the campaign trail, but if President Trump wins in November, and I'm using him as a presumptive nominee, if he wins, then a lot of the business interests are going to come in because there is a lot of these tax credits, these carrots, if you will, that are going to red states. There are projects in Texas, in Florida, and so forth that if the repeal and replace were to be implemented, they just dry up overnight. So instead, I think what you're going to see is if President Trump wins, you're going to see him begin to use the power of the executive order to direct agencies like Treasury to begin to whittle away at some of these clean energy tax credits. The reason why it's so important is a lot of these solar companies that are out there, if the IRA tax credits don't exist, they're going to be in a real challenging environment. So we're getting a lot of questions from clients at the moment saying, hey, can you help us with our 1 to 2 to 3 year planning? Because the IRA it's very imperative that the IRA sticks around for a lot of these companies.
So you're operating under the assumption that there's not really a world in which, even if Trump were to win and be in charge of the executive branch of the government, that this could be outright repealed in its entirety because it likely wouldn't pass in Congress.
Yeah, so there's two scenarios at play here. I mean, for those of you may recall, the IRA passed via reconciliation. So you need a majority in the House, a majority in the Senate. You don't need a filibuster. You need the president to sign off. So you would essentially need a red wave in this scenario.
Yeah.
So that's the first assumption. If you get that red wave, then the second assumption is the business community is going to come in here and try and tell some of their Republican allies, if you will, maybe you don't need a full repeal or replace. Maybe we just need targeted changes here. And remember, for reconciliation, and by all means, I don't want to get into a reconciliation discussion on air, but for reconciliation, it's a procedural tool that you can only use once per fiscal year.
Yeah.
And there are certain things about it. And I don't think the Republicans, if they had a supermajority, meaning the House, the Senate, and the White House, would want to use that process for the IRA.
We haven't had to explain reconciliation on the air for a minute.
Yeah.
So thank you for sparing us. But you said something important. If these programs, these projects are so popular in these red states, why are we getting rid of it?
Well, I think a lot of it is also just like the institutional thinking of, seeing these tax incentives go to clean energy at, when, you'll have President Trump talk about coal country, for example. Yeah. And so I think, if you look at the Republican bills that are going through Congress right now, they have this bill that would repeal all the tax incentives tied to this. I just don't think that's going to be in place. Now, what you could see is changes to hydrogen credits, carbon credits, the electric vehicles. So if you're Tesla or Rivian, this is certainly important at play. But you should note that if President Trump wins and he does these executive orders, then it will be up to the Treasury Secretary to implement a lot of this. And then you would also then be subject to probably business influences and lobbyists and so forth saying, hey, we'd like this tax credit, don't touch this, or touch this instead. So a lot of moving parts here, but we would just say that for now, we have a very low odds on a repeal, slightly bigger odds if President Trump wins on targeted cuts, but for your 1 to 3 year planning, you can just presume as if these things are pretty sticking around for a little bit longer.
Just another reason for your phone to be ringing off the hook these days, right?
Just wait until we're about a week from now closer to a partial shutdown.
Absolutely.
And then Nathan Dean's life is going to be much more fun.
You'll drop by and tell us about it. Nathan Dean at Bloomberg Intelligence, many thanks as always. We are his clients here on Balance of Power.